You're standing in your kitchen at 11 p.m. eating rice from a pot because you sold the plates. Not in a dramatic, story-worthy way, just practically. You needed the $100 and the plates were there. Your phone has 43 unread messages and a bank notification you've been swiping away for 3 days because reading the actual number makes it real. The apartment is technically yours for 11 more days. After that, you're not sure what it is. This is what changing your life looks like. Let me back up. You found her profile on a language exchange app. She was 24, living in Osaka, learning English for a job in international trade. You were learning Japanese for no real reason except that it felt like the kind of thing a more interesting version of yourself would do. Her first message was a grammar question. Straightforward, practical. You answered it, she answered your Japanese correction back, and somewhere in the back and forth you stopped noticing that 2 hours had passed. The early months were the best months. That sounds obvious, but it's worth saying because those months were genuinely good, not just good in comparison to what came later. She was funny in the specific way that's hard to translate. Dry, understated, the kind of humor that assumes you're smart enough to catch it. She asked questions nobody asked you. What did you want to be doing in 5 years? Not career-wise, but actually, how did you want your days to feel? What was the last thing that surprised you? You had to think about the answers. That felt important. She mentioned her mother's hospital bills in month 3. Not as a request. More as a weight she was carrying that slipped into conversation. Her mother had been sick for a year. The medical costs in Japan were more manageable than you'd imagined. But still, on her salary, it added up. She wasn't asking. She was just telling you. The distinction matters, or it felt like it did then. You offered. She resisted for exactly 2 messages before accepting. The amount was small. Small enough that refusing would have felt meaner than giving. You told yourself that's why you did it. That's not entirely true. The fuller truth is that she cried when you offered, not performed crying, just the quiet kind where her voice went tight. And she said she didn't know why she'd told you that. She wasn't trying to make you feel obligated. And being the person who made that happen, being the person she trusted with the weight she was carrying, felt like something. Felt like being chosen. That feeling is the thing. The money is almost secondary. You could have lost the same amount at a casino and shrugged. What made this different was that every transfer came attached to a version of yourself you'd never quite managed before. Someone steady, someone generous, someone who showed up. You flew to Osaka in month 5. 14 hours, middle seat, arrived looking like something a bag had been carrying. She met you outside the arrivals gate and you stood there for a second, just looking at each other before she laughed that laugh, and the 14 hours dissolved. 2 weeks. You slept in a business hotel near her apartment because she said her roommate situation was complicated, and you didn't push it. You found out later there was no roommate. You found out a lot of things later. The 2 weeks were real, though. You're sure of that. The rainy afternoon in Namba where you ducked into a tiny ramen place that fit 8 people and fogged the windows. The walk across the Dotonbori Bridge at midnight talking about whether you believed in anything, and discovering that you both had roughly the same complicated non-answer. She grabbed your hand on the train home and fell asleep on your shoulder, and you sat completely still for 6 stops past your station because you didn't want to move. That's the thing about someone who's good at this. The real moments are real. They're not fabricated. She wasn't pretending to sleep on your shoulder. She wasn't performing the ramen conversation. That's what makes the accounting impossible afterward. You can't separate out what was genuine and what was strategy, because maybe she never could either. Maybe she learned somewhere along the way that genuine warmth and strategic warmth can coexist in the same person without either one canceling the other out. Month 7, she lost her job. The international trade position had a restructuring, she said. 1/3 of her department. You believed it because it was plausible and because not believing it would have required you to look at something you weren't ready to look at. She was stressed and smaller than usual on video calls, sitting in dim light, and you wanted to fix it the way you'd been fixing things for 7 months. So you did. You covered her rent for 2 months while she looked for work. A bridge, you both called it. Just a bridge. She found a new job in month 9. You were relieved in a way that had nothing to do with the money. You were relieved because it meant the version of her you'd met was still intact. Employed, building something, going somewhere. The money you could absorb. What you couldn't absorb was the idea that you'd been wrong about who she was. Month 10 brought her friend's wedding. She needed a dress and a train ticket to Tokyo and a contribution to the gift. Because her friend group had a tradition, everyone contributed equally, and she was embarrassed about where her savings were after the job gap. You did the calculation without doing the calculation. By which I mean you knew roughly what you'd sent. You knew the number was uncomfortable, and you sent the wedding money anyway because stopping now felt like it would retroactively invalidate everything before it. Like the only way to make the past make sense was to keep going. That logic should have alarmed you. It didn't. Month 12, she visited you. First time she'd come to your city. You spent 2 weeks showing her around, translating your life for someone who didn't share its context. She was warm and present and genuinely curious about everything. Asked to see your old neighborhood, your university campus, the coffee shop you'd worked at during grad school. At the time, it felt like intimacy. Later, you'd understand it differently. She was learning the dimensions of what you had and where it came from, the same way you'd learn the square footage of an apartment before deciding whether to rent it. Somewhere in month 14, you started having a feeling you didn't have words for. Not suspicion exactly. More like a low-grade unease, the kind that lives in your body before your brain catches up. You started noticing patterns. The requests always came after a period of increased warmth. A particularly good video call, a long message about how much she appreciated you, and then 3 days later a situation would arrive. You noticed this and told yourself you were being uncharitable. You noticed it again the next month and told yourself the same thing. Being uncharitable became a wall you kept building to protect her from your own perception of her. Month 16, she told you about an opportunity. A small business idea, importing design goods from Osaka to sell online. She'd done the research, had the contacts, just needed startup capital to make the first order. She laid it out carefully, like a presentation. Said she'd been nervous to ask because she didn't want you to think of her differently. Said she would pay it back with interest once the business got moving. The number she named was the largest single thing she'd ever asked for. You took a week to think about it. That's the part you come back to, the week. You spent 7 days building the case for giving her the money, finding every angle that made it make sense, and when you couldn't quite get there, honestly, you told yourself the thing that ends a lot of stories like this. If I don't trust her by now, what have the last 16 months been? You transferred the money on a Thursday. She called immediately, voice bright in a way it hadn't been in weeks. Said she'd been so worried you'd say no. Said this meant everything. Said you were the only person who'd ever really believed in her. The business never launched. The explanation came in pieces, spread out over 2 months so no single piece felt like the whole thing. Supply chain issues. A contact who fell through. A problem with the import licensing that was going to take time to resolve. Each explanation arrived in the middle of something else. Minimized. Not quite looked at directly. By the time you understood that nothing was coming, 4 months had passed and asking directly felt like an accusation. Month 20, she started being difficult to reach. Not suddenly. That's the thing about slow changes. You don't notice them because each individual day looks almost identical to the one before. A reply that came 4 hours later instead of 1. A call rescheduled twice. A weekend when she said she was tired and would talk Monday, and then Monday came with a short message and no call. You asked if something was wrong. She said she was going through something and needed a little space to process it. You gave her the space. You kept giving her the space as the weeks went by, because asking again felt like pressure, and pressure felt like the wrong response to someone you loved who was struggling. She never came back from the space. The conversation, when it finally happened, was 20 minutes. She was sorry. She'd changed. She needed to focus on herself. She hoped you understood. You asked about the startup money, not bitterly, just practically, and she said she'd pay you back when she was more stable and she really was sorry and she hoped you could be friends. You said okay. You don't know why you said okay. Maybe because 20 minutes was already longer than you thought you could stay upright. You spent 2 weeks trying to figure out when it went wrong, which assumes it went wrong at a specific moment, which is the mistake. It didn't go wrong at a moment. It went wrong before it started, which doesn't mean it was entirely false, which doesn't mean the ramen place wasn't real, or the train wasn't real, or the way she slept on your shoulder. All of that was real. It was just also something else simultaneously, and the two things coexisted so smoothly that pulling them apart afterward is like trying to separate dye from water. Here's what you know now that you didn't then. The warmth was genuine, and it was also functional. The vulnerability was real, and it was also a tool, not coldly deployed, just second nature. The way anyone learns to use whatever works. She didn't set out to take anything from you. She set out to survive, and surviving in her life had required learning to find the people who could be made to feel like the most important person in the room. You were good at feeling like that. You had years of practice being almost chosen, nearly enough, the kind of man who could be deeply valued without quite being first. That's a very specific loneliness, and she found it the way water finds a crack. The plates are gone. The money is a number you'll be managing for 2 years. The job you talked yourself out of taking last year because you wanted to stay close to your laptop in case she called is still there, maybe, or something like it is. You can probably recover most of it, practically speaking. That's not actually the hard part. The hard part is that you knew. Not the details, not the other person she was apparently seeing for the last 4 months, not the startup money that was never a startup, but the shape of it. You felt the pattern in month 10 and you named it something kinder. You felt it again in month 14 and you called yourself uncharitable. You built so many walls to protect your own perception of her that by the end you were living inside your own defense of someone who had already left. You didn't lose 2 years to her. You lost 2 years to the version of yourself she made possible. The person who was finally generous enough, patient enough, trusted enough. That person only existed in relation to her, and now she's gone, and you're left with the kitchen and the pot of rice and the plates that used to be here, and the question of who you are when nobody's looking at you like that. The bank notification is still there. 3 days of swiping it away, you open it, the number is what you knew it would be. It doesn't get more real when you look at it. It was always this real, you were just somewhere else. You put the phone face down on the counter and finish the rice standing up. Tomorrow you'll figure out the next thing. Tonight you're just here in the kitchen, in the quiet, with the version of yourself that was here before she made you feel like someone else. Smaller than you got used to and more honest, and yours. That has to be enough. It's going to have to be enough.